afternoon and good morning, participants in Thailand and all attendees from around the world. Welcome. We are now on session 2A on the topic of how to integrate equity into education laws and policies for different target groups. I'm Parina Sivanit. Will be serving as your moderator today for this session. In this session, we'll keep our focus on the theme of plenary 2, which is to bring vision into action. But we'll go even more deeply and more specifically on how legal framework, laws, and policies and other supporting mechanisms have been enacted and play a key role, if not an obstacle, in implementing equity-based education. We are pleased to have 3 distinguished speakers with us from 3 selected countries, Finland, Japan, and Thailand. The panelists who will share their insights with us are Dr. Krayot Pattarawat from Thailand, Dr. Christina Agrila from Finland, and Professor Yoshiyuki Nakata from Japan. Each panelist will be allocated for about 15 minutes to speak, and the Q&A session will begin afterwards. All online conference participants are invited to send your questions via Q&A chat box available on the conference website. I would like to start with Dr. Krayot Pattarawat, a Deputy Managing Director of the Equitable Education Fund of Thailand. Dr. Krayot, in Thailand, the concept of equitable education has been included in the 2017 Thai Constitution, followed by the enactment of the Equitable Education Fund Act in 2018. Please share your insights of why and how that could possibly happen, and whether you think and what are the key elements that would successfully help level up the equity of education in Thailand. Dr. Krayot, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Parina, for introduction, and thank you so much for the organizing committee to invite me to participate in this session. I would like to show you the experience from Thailand. We have been working very hard in the past decade to improve the life of millions of children, particularly on the equitable education. And today I would like to explain about our progress in making this Equitable Education Act 2018. In the past few decades, Thailand have been spending and investing a lot in terms of education budgeting. From this diagram, you can see that in every single year, we have been investing more and more on this education budget. In the past 10 years, we invest 2 times more than the last decade in terms of education. However, if you look at the Human Development Index, in terms of the ranking of the HDI, Thailand have been in decline in the past decade. So this diagram shows you a sharp difference in terms of the level of investment and the outcome we achieve at the end of it. On the side of the competitiveness, a number of international rankings have shown Thailand consistently perform very well in terms of economic competitiveness. However, if you look at the social security and education outcome, it's quite poor in terms of comparison with the other side of the performance in Thai competitiveness. So education and human security have been ranked at the quite low in terms of the international comparison. That's one of the side that we need to concern. The other issue is that this is the analysis from the World Bank. It shows that calculating the outcome of the PISA in the past few rounds of the test, we can find that the student in Thai rural school compared to the student in the Thai urban school, the distance between their performance in terms of literacy is about 2-year difference. For example, if you look at the 15 years old in the rural area and the 15 years old in the urban school, there are actually 2 years gap between them in terms of basic literacy, which is the clear picture of how difference and the gap of inequality in Thai education system. And in terms of the number, if you look at this diagram, it shows that from age group of 0 to 17, which is the basic education age group, Thailand have a number of at-risk and the out-of-school children. For example, at the preschool level, we have about 200,000 or 10% of the preschool children who are still out of school. In the new constitution of Thailand, preschool has been now compulsory and must be provided for free in Thai society. But certainly we can see that about 10% of this age group still out of school. And moving on to the basic schooling, the compulsory school age of 6 to 14 years, there are about 200,000 of the out of school children still remain out of school. Some of them delay their entrance of the schooling. Some of them drop out later on at a later stage, particularly in the lower secondary school. And the Thai school compulsory school law only ends at the 15 years old or the lower secondary school. There are a number of students who are talented and would like to pursue, but due to their economic challenge and a number of the disadvantage issues, they need to drop out later on. So we have about 240,000 students drop out from school right after the compulsory school age. And so this is to give you a rough picture of the inequitable in Thai education in the past decade. And in terms of investment, as I mentioned before, Thai education system invests 2 times more in this decade compared to the last decade. However, if you look deeply in this national education accounts database, we can see that although the investment overall improved 2 times into about 5 to 6% of GDP, there is this amount of investment on the poorest student in Thailand that remains stable at the same level of 0.5% in the past decade. So this is to give you an idea that although we improve 2 times of the level of investment of education, but there are some disadvantaged population inside the education system that remain the same, receive exactly the same of the budget as the past 10 years. So there are some of the concern on this kind of investment. And if you look at this international report by UNESCO and Resolve for Development, it shows that in this region in ASEAN, Thailand can gain over 1.7 in terms of GDP. That's roughly half of GDP growth in the past decade. We can grow to 50% more if we could take these out of school children back to the school system. So the most highly profitable investment in human resource in this country received 0.5% of investment in the past 10 years, despite the 2-time investment improved in the past decade. So there must be something wrong in terms of investment and the education resource allocation in this country. And like Einstein said, if you would like to have a different result, you can't do things over again and again with the same method that you have done. So the Constitution of Thailand 2017, the drafting committee would like to do things differently, and they go very radically. Because as far as we're concerned, there are not many, or if none, the constitution in any country that really write down in their constitution that there must be a setup of the education fund independently managed by the government. From the government, they must be run independently, and the government must provide the fund and the tax incentive for donation to this education fund by only 1 year after the constitution has been in place. And they also require that the independent committee is setting up to drafting this law. So this is quite radical reform that has been putting in the Constitution of Thailand 2017. So in 2017, after April 6, when the Constitution is in effect, there are the Independent Committee of Education Reform, or ICER, setting up by the Thai government in accordance to the Constitution of Thailand. They have a mandate of 1 year to draft these independent laws on Equitable Education Fund. So this committee have taken a very broad public hearing approach. They not only consult the independent think tank or international organization, they also go around the country to listen to people around the country to see how best this independent fund can be set up. Over 2,000 people from all parts of the society have been listened to, and the committee themselves have been travel around the country to really hear from the actual beneficiary of this fund. It's my privilege to be as the secretary of this drafting committee. So we have been working quite hard in that 1 year period to really listen to the needs from the people. And there are these 10 years goal of the Equitable Education Fund to be made. We would like to eradicate out of school in 10 years from Thailand in time for the SDG goal by 2030. And we would like to also prevent any new dropout from the school system, and we need to also work with the teacher and the school across the country to improve this equitable education in the classroom level as well. And this is the idea that Equitable Education Fund doesn't mean that everybody gets the same amount of input. It's about the outcome, that everybody should get the outcome that they need to achieve the equitable outcome in education later on. And this is the strategy that we need to work. The fund need to work independently and need to use information technology to make as a game changer to do things differently. And innovative financing needs to be identified. We can't rely solely on the government budget. And also individual information must be tracked from the day one that they receive the fund until they graduate from school and the future career that they have. So we can monitor the success of the fund and improve the management later on. And also the fund cannot succeed without this 6 game changer of data, EdTech, innovative financing, assessment in terms of the developmental assessment, and also research. And certainly, as this conference main goal about all for education. Equitable education is not the job or the target goal for this fund alone. They need to identify the partner and work with all the partners to make sure that this goal of equitable education in Thailand can realize. And this is the last slide for me. Thailand, since the Jomtien Declaration of EFA in 1990, we have been truly and continuously committed to the equitable education in the global arena. We not only commit to the Millennium Development Goal in the 2000s, we also continue to commit to the Sustainable Development Goal to move on to the secondary education and also the education for the migrants and the stateless children in this country. And in this past few years, we have also committed to the ASEAN Declaration of the Out-of-School Children, and in 2018, the Equitable Education Fund. So this is just to give you an idea that equitable education can be realized if the agenda of equitable education can be managed independently. And they must be identified that this is the agenda not for the fund, but for the whole society. Everybody needs to come together to ensure that the ownership of the equitable education is shared by everybody in the society. And now at the international community, we look forward to work with anyone around the world who have a passion and would like to work together on this cause. And we look forward to see you wherever you are when the COVID-19 situation is declined. We would like to work with everyone and make sure that equitable education is not only realized in Thailand, but at the international level. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Krayot. Now I'd like to move on to learn more from the next speaker, Dr. Kristina Agrila from the MDI Public Finland. Dr. Kristina is a senior advisor with MDI Public a consultancy for regional development, and has been a member of the expert group for the UNESCO Global Network of Learning Cities from its beginning in 2013. Please hear from Dr. Agrila how educational rights have been included in the Constitution of Finland since 1999, and how Finland has become one of the countries having the best educational system in the world. What can we learn from the experience of Finland? Dr. Kristina, the floor is yours.
Hello, this is Kristiina Erkkilä from Finland, and I'm going to talk about how to integrate equity into education laws and policies for different target groups in Finland. Let me start with a large-scale study that asked what Finnish people think about the past. People were asked to put various events in the Finnish history in order of importance. The main achievement was the comprehensive school. It received more than political and economic accomplishments, wars, or great men or women. So it truly is an important factor in the Finnish history. Finland is 103 years old country, independent country. So we have a constitution of Finland, the latest one from 1999. It has a section on educational rights. It says everyone has the right to basic education free of charge. Provisions on the duty to receive education are laid down by an act. The public authority shall, as provided in more detail by an act, guarantee for everyone equal opportunity to receive other educational services in accordance with their ability and special needs, as well as the opportunity to develop themselves without being prevented by economic hardship. So this is one of our basic documents, one of our legal frameworks in Finland. Why is it so important to include equity into educational law? In Finland, we have great faith in the power of education and knowledge, and it has been an important element in building of the Finnish nation. We are only 5 million people in Finland, so we need all the talent and manpower from our people. In the previous study, the comprehensive school is seen as the foundation for equality, well-being, and civilization in the society. To point out why is it so important for us to get all the manpower to the use of the country is a recent publication from OECD, Investing in Youth in Finland, where it shows clearly how Finland faces the strongest shortage of high-skilled workers in the OECD. This was a very alarming article for us. But we're not only concerned about the societal factor in this. We're also concerned about every individual, every young person. How can we help them maximize their potential, remembering that every child is unique? So in the Finnish national core curricula, we have different competencies that we have included so that young people can improve their sides according to their own needs. How did the Finnish government initiate the law? There were big groundbreaking decisions made in the 60s and 70s. 9 years of comprehensive school was introduced. The 60s discussion was very lively, and it portrayed of the welfare society we were moving to. We wanted to have more equal and better fitting education system for the welfare society. So the planning started in the 60s with a lot of discussions and debates. We had 2-tier system more academic and more practical oriented education systems, but now we wanted one that was for 9 years, which provided equal opportunities to all students, whatever their place of residence, gender, family background, or financial standing was. The actual reform started from the north, from Lapland in 1972, and moved towards more populated areas in the south all the way until 1978. At the same time, there was a change, a reform in teacher education, so that it led to a master's degrees in the end of 70s, and at the same time, new support system with inclusion of special education was introduced. So we don't have not only one law in education in Finland, but many different laws. So all the sectors on education have their own laws, but they all include the same basic principles. High quality education for all, free of charge at all levels from pre-primary to higher education, and providing for the younger ones, they can get textbooks, daily meals, and transportation. But for the older ones, some of that, but they also have a system of study grants and loans for those who are 17 or over. And also we have adult education allowance. Every child has a right, every student has a right to educational support. The special needs education is generally provided in conjunction with mainstream education. There are also great efforts to support language minorities and migrants in the country. I want to show you the Finnish educational system. It's very flexible. Actually, the flexibility is the guiding principle in Finnish education. Compulsory education at the moment lasts 9 years. Children are not expected to make binding decisions at an early stage, and there are no dead ends in the system. So great flexibility. This, I think, the whole education system sort of portrays what is important, the equal opportunities for everyone. And this is all planned for lifelong learning. What can you then learn from Finland? I think the underlying thing is that education lies at the heart of the Finnish society. We have strong belief in investing in education and equality at the same time. As we are so few, like I stated earlier, this is really important for our nation. The education system is based on trust and responsibility. No national testing of learning outcomes, school ranking lists, or inspection systems. There's also a strong role of municipalities and schools. Competent teachers with master's degree have autonomy in their work. Finland has a firmly grounded belief in providing schools with autonomy and support. This means a great deal of freedom for schools and teachers. I want to share you this slide and all the groups in it, because education in Finland is actually developed and planned together in partnership with representatives of all these groups. This is to ensure the commitment and seamless implementation then in the field. We have a two-tier national administration in Finland. There is the Ministry of Education and Culture, which actually handles the education policy, the preparation of legislation and state funding. But then we also have a Finnish National Agency for Education, which is a national development agency. It gathers the national core curricula and qualification requirements together with all those groups that I just showed you. And it also takes care of supporting evidence-based policymaking for the ministry. It supports reform and development, but also it services directly to education providers and learners. Also, it is supporting internationalization in education in Finland. Then when it comes to basic and upper secondary education, we have two-level steering, central steering and local decisions. You have to remember that most education in Finland is publicly funding. So responsibility for educational funding is divided between the two, the state and the local authorities. So educational priorities are set centrally, the minimum time allocation as well, national core curricula, and the size of state subsidies. Locally, then you can also have educational priorities, local curricula, allocation of those subsidies. You can decide of the class size, of recruitment of educational personnel, and you take care of the quality assurance. We have some private institutions in Finland, not very many, but most of the private institutions do not differ from those that are publicly maintained. They follow the national core curricula and qualification requirements, and they also receive public funding. So they act pretty much the same as the public ones. What are then the challenges in integrating equity into legal framework? As I've shown in the case of Finland, context matters. The mindset and attitudes of the people in education, but also the mindset and attitudes of the general public, they matter. Because integrating equity requires resources, both time and money, and long-term commitment. That's also challenging that in this long-term commitment and plans and implementation, new challenges might arise. For example, in Finland, we got in 2015 a lot of immigrants, which was a very new situation to us. So I would say that it requires faith in lifelong learning, both for the individuals, but also the system's lifelong learning, as you might say. Right now, we have a few reforms in place and in planning, actually, at this point. There's a Right to Learn program that enhances equality and non-discrimination in the society. The other one is extending the compulsory education so that the minimum school leaving age would be 18 years instead of 16, which means again that the education would be free till you're 18. This would improve the level of skills across the society, and this reform is due to be ready to start in 2021. But the same or very similar discussions are going on as were in the 60s. It costs too much, now is not the right time, and so on. Especially the COVID-19 situation didn't help the going forward of these reforms. So it's never easy, but it requires a lot of persistence. I was asked to come up with or introduce a model for success. In Finland, once during the electoral period, each ministry makes its own futures review using national and international research and indicators. And this is the current one from the Ministry of Education and Culture, a model for success. It's based on trust and striving for competence and meaningful life. And I want to leave this with you to think about if this could be something for your own context. Perhaps there's something you can use for your own thinking. In the end, I want to leave you with my favorite quote: "Education is too valuable to be left only for educators." I thank you very much for the organizers of this conference. I think All for Education is very similar goal that I have in my work. So I'm happy to share that goal with you all. Thank you very much. Kiitos from Finland.
Thank you very much, Dr. Christina. Next, we are going to learn about the experience from Professor Yoshiyuki Nakata from the Sacred Heart University, Japan, with special focus on out-of-school children and youth. Professor Yoshiyuki Nakata is a professor at the Department of Education, University of Sacred Heart, Tokyo, as well as a deputy director of the Sacred Heart Institute for Sustainable Futures. Today, we will learn from him what are legal challenges and how laws and its supporting mechanisms have been in place to level the playing fields for out-of-school children and youth in Japan towards an equitable education society. Please welcome Professor Yoshiyuki Nakata.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm just going to talk about a case in Japan. And the title is Legal Challenges Towards an Equitable Education Society with special focus on out-of-school children and youth in Japan. My name is Yoshiyuki Nagata, Professor of Department of Education, University of the Sacred Heart, Tokyo. And also I'm a Deputy Director, Sacred Heart Institute for Sustainable Futures at the same university. Now, I just want to start with the explanation on the two different streams of special education needs by looking back at the educational development history in Japan. There is one stream in which we try to respond to educational needs from children with difficulties, including orphans, disabled children, and children in poverty. These are very serious problem straight after the end of the Second World War in Japan. But at the same time, there is another stream in which special education needs are very clearly seen. We try to respond to educational needs from families, children with particular religion or belief or ideology, including children youth at alternative schools, free schools, democratic schools, or Steiner schools or homeschoolers. I just want to explain additionally with the time span. This is a transition of different education needs in Japan. After the Second World War in 50s, we can see easily the poverty and child labor issues. But after around 20 years, we started to see the school phobia and school refusers. This is the beginning of the, out of school children's history in the modern days. And another after 20 years, we started to see mushrooming up of alternative schools, such as Steiner schools or what we call democratic schools or free schools. We call it free spaces now. So these are all the history. And now let me explain about the number of out-of-school children now and in the past. This is a chart explaining about the increasing number of out-of-school children in Japan. And as you can see, there is a slight increase at the junior high school level and the primary school level, but this is in total. And you can see between 5 to 10 per 1,000 primary school children are out of school. They may be school refusers. And at the junior high school level, it's around 35. Now I can show you the more precise data, but you can see slightly increasing, but by looking at the last 5 years, in 2013, out of 1,000, one out of 276 students were out of primary school, and 1 out of 37 at the secondary. But after around 5 years, 144, and this number decreased to 27. So recently, we can see increasing number of children are getting out of school in Japan. Now, interestingly, there is a different number of out-of-school children at different levels of education. These are primary level of education, 1 to 6, and this is junior high school at the secondary level. Now you can see there is a kind of a gap between primary 6, the last year, and the first year junior high school. So I think something should be done about this. There is a gap here, and there is an increasing number of children here as well. Now, interestingly, as we can see increasing number of out-of-school children, we can see increasing number of alternative schools or facilities or learning facilities. This is a result of the survey. So after 80s, we can see mushrooming up of alternative schools. They include Steiner School, Waldorf Steiner School. In some countries call it Waldorf School, other countries Steiner School. We call it Steiner School. The number of school is very limited, 7 actually. So they were started to their own education after late 80s, and then gradually increased and increased. And this is the total number of students. So nearly 1,000 and still increasing. And other types of a democratic school like Sudbury Valley or Summerhill type, there is also an increasing number. So you can see alternative stream of education apart from mainstream education. You can see I'm one of the board members of A Free Spaces in Kawasaki, and this is a picture from there. This is actually a public funded but privately run by the non-profit organization. Yeah, so children, they do not go to school, but they just play around and they're learning at their own pace, and they do whatever they like with friends or individually at this kind of place. One of our research friends did a wonderful survey. They asked these organizations if they want legal status or not. Interestingly, more than 20% said no. Why? Because there are many reasons, but one of the main reasons is they just don't want to have a national kind of set curriculum or others regulations. And nearly 40% said yes, but not by education law, other laws, and no ideas, nearly 30%. This is a very interesting result. And now we have law of guaranteeing educational opportunities for all. Let me call it LGEO. This was established in December 2016. And this is a legislation by House members. And based on fundamental law of education, this is a very important law for all of the Japanese students, youth. And also, this is not a common case, but they based the legislation upon the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which Japan, of course, has ratified itself. Now, another feature is educational opportunities for all children with focus on futoko. Futoko is out of school in Japanese. Children and those who learn at evening classes. request for central and local governments to prepare for taking necessary financial measures. Then, needs-based learning for Futoko out-of-school children, and importance of diversified appropriate learning activities outside schools, and collaboration among stakeholders, government, schools, free schools, and others. Yeah. So based upon the law, the government just started to prepare allocation of the budget, 212 million yen. This is the US dollars. And in relation to out-of-school children, I don't go into details, but later I just want to try to share a big picture of this. And this is the budget for the evening classes. So they started to fund. But I just want to share with you about the beneficiaries. Who are beneficiaries of this law? There are many, many stakeholders. This is a conventional type of public schools. Of course, national curriculums are following, and social rights are very important. But nowadays, in the middle of globalized trend, there are schools for what we call global human development resources. Or for globalized world, they're preparing youngsters to be active in the globalized world. So this is also market oriented, but rather towards rights for individual freedom. And this is the evening schools which we decided to support through the legislation. And as we have seen, free schools and free spaces, all alternative sort of schools are here, individual oriented. And so this law, in the process of establishing the details of the law, citizen groups, they emphasized they need this kind of backing second from the law for these schools as well as evening school. But as a result of the the discussions, it ended up with focusing on these areas. There are out-of-school children, and here, and also evening schools who had no opportunities or very few opportunities to attend schools in their lives, or the people who are coming from other countries and started to work in companies and others factories without having any knowledge on Japanese language. So there are three major challenges in integrating equity in developing a legal framework. One is coordination among different stakeholders. I think it's easy for us to call alternative schools in Japan, but there are many different types, including homeschoolers. So all these groups should sit together and discuss together for their own futures. And also legal support may end up with a discrimination of minorities by establishing double track line systems in society. I think as we have observed here, school teachers or headmasters or mistresses, they can say, oh, you can choose these type of schools and you can go there. But we have to think about what public good, publicness in the field of education is. So if we make a sort of a two track systems, one here or here or here, or probably a multi-track systems, I think we have to carefully discuss about this. And because equitable education needs a fairness for all these stakeholders. Now, let me go on. The third point is alternatives may lose its uniqueness as a result of inclusive process. This is the issue on accreditation. if they receive a set amount of fund from the government, local or central, and they have to, of course, follow a set amount of the request. So, but by doing that, they may lose their own uniqueness. There are alternatives because of their own unique philosophies or theories or approaches in education. But they have to somehow compromise in many cases I have seen in my international surveys. And there are groups who do not receive these funds or subsidies from the government because they do not want to follow the rules. So this is a kind of a tension now in Japan too. Now, let me go on to the key of Aiken principles to successfully include equity in legal framework and implement the law. Excuse me. The first one is mechanisms that reflect voices from the minorities. I think the voices are very important in the process of making policies and further legislations. Especially, we have to listen to the voices of the youth, which we have not yet enough done. And independent regular meetings by the multi-stakeholders. And we have to establish a culture of listening to minorities in this kind of system. Especially nowadays under the neoliberalistic school or educational reforms, minorities' voices are not enough being heard. So I think we have to establish this kind of a mechanism quite strong. The last but not the least is we need unconventional type of monitoring systems, alternative systems. I think it's easy for us to use the monitoring systems which we just get used to use, which is mainly meant to be for school development. But most of these schools, alternative type of schools or homeschoolers, they are not school educators. So we do need develop a new sort of monitoring system and also evaluation system as well. Yeah, and this is time. Yeah. And yeah, for further readings, I have done a bit of an international comparative study on this and this as well. But this is a kind of updated version, but only now in Japanese. And this is the International Handbook of Alternative Education. I wrote about a case in Kawasaki in Japan. Yeah, this is a reference. And thank you very much for listening. That's all.
Thank you very much, Professor Nakata. Thank you very much, all speakers. From the presentation, I can pick up the keywords to integrate equity into the legal framework and laws. The first one is the sufficiency resources, that the government should provide sufficient budgeting, and those budgets should be primarily and specifically allocated to equitable education and needed groups. Second, the independencies of the system. If the system depends largely on political campaigns, the laws and budgets may not be rightly allocated. Voices of minorities and special needs groups may not be heard. Third, the flexibility of the scheme. And since our target groups are very different, conventional schemes will not fit with them all. Alternative, unconventional and more flexible schemes should be available for particularly needed target groups. And the last key element that everyone speaks is about the inclusiveness and partnership. If we can include all stakeholders and build strong partnership between all sectors, that would guarantee the success of the to include the equity into the education system. So in summary, there are three principles that the right attitude to guarantee the enactment of the law. And second, the enactment of the law to guarantee commitments of the society and the legal obligations and commitments to guarantee implementation. And most importantly, specific budget allocation and independent, flexible, and seamless implementation will hopefully include and guarantee the education, equitable education of the society. So, thank you very much.